I'm going to talk about Princess Alexandra Kropotkin in the American press, and the dates have been changed, adjusted from what was in initial program. The dates will be from 1927 to 1951. The reason why I chose to talk about Alexandra Kropotkin, being not a historian, is that a few years ago I was working on my book about the Russian women during the Belle Epoque in Europe, and I came across this personality, Alexandra Kropotkin, who was the daughter of the Russian revolutionary. And I was so interested. And recently, when I heard about this symposium, I decided to talk about her in detail. Psychoanalysis of her publications. I'm going to talk about the 3 stages in her life: her childhood in England, her formative years in Russia, and her maturity in the United States. So this is how an author, Jeffrey Mayers, describes Alexandra Kropotkin in his book Somerset Maugham. A daughter of the notorious anarchist Prince Peter Kropotkin, was born in England in 1887 during her father's years of exile. She grew up in the socialist circles of William Morris and Bernard Shaw, Oscar Wilde, and they knew her as a child and called her most lovely girl. A princess and a daughter of the revolutionary who had been sentenced to life imprisonment and had escaped from Siberia, had her personality formed by the intellectual atmosphere in which she was born and raised in the family of Peter Kropotkin, a writer, explorer, and the founder of the anarchist movement. His political views and principles were familiar to Sasha from her early childhood, but she didn't become an anarchist. A long-awaited child, named after Peter Kropotkin's deceased brother Alexander, a journalist and scientist who had committed suicide, Sasha inhaled the atmosphere of patriotism from her early years. Her father was her idol and her friend, and not only she inherited his character traits, he had instilled in her love for Russia. She seemed to embody the Russian spirit at the time that England first discovered the Russian novelists, Dagilev's ballet, and the music of Stravinsky. And though she was born and educated in England, that was the place of her birth. But her motherland was always Russia, with which she was connected emotionally. Her mother, Sophia Grigorievna Kropotkin, was the one who literally formed in her daughter the archetype of a Russian woman through the wealth of Russian culture, the Russian folk tales, through the Russian lullaby songs, and through the Russian authors. She was deeply upset. Both were deeply upset when they had to part at the time of Alexandra's emigration, when the time came for her to leave. And Alexandra was scarred through the rest of her life by the fact that she had to leave her mother behind. In the portrait by the Irish artist Sir Gerald Kelly, we see her expression suggests forcefulness and determination. Talking to Sasha to Maxim Gorky, Bernard Shaw wrote, "A little time ago, a Russian lady brought up an extreme revolutionist and, alluding to the mission of Holy Russia, said to me with wild enthusiasm that the Russians would give the world back its lost soul. The mystique and enigma of the Russian soul would be part of Sasha's aura through all her life. The soul that developed through all the 3 stages, coming to the highest stage, that is perfection. when she apprehended the intelligence, when she attained that stage of immediate intellectual intuition, the possession of the forms of things known that is true knowledge. She married Boris Lebedev in 1910, but before that, she had a short affair with the novelist Somerset Maugham that concluded with friendly emotions on both sides. So when they met again in 1917 in St. Petersburg, where Somerset Maugham, as an MI5 Secret Service agent, had been on a mission, she helped him. Maugham found her extremely intelligent, with an alarming love of intrigue and a lust for power. Intellectually and as well as sexually attractive, she served very often Maugham Russian tea in glasses and talked for hours and hours about Marx and Gorky, about fate, about passion, and the brotherhood of men. He describes his feelings to her in his novel Ashendon, where he depicted her as Anastasia Leonidov, like this. Of course he knew now that he had not loved her, but Tolstoy and Dostoevsky, Rimsky-Korsakov, Stravinsky, and Bakst in her, but he was not quite sure if the point occurred to her. Alexandra Kropotkin returned to Russia with her husband Boris Lebedev in 1915. Her father followed 2 years later when the Tsar fell. In a striking contrast to the dull, shabby life she had been forced to lead in London, she was soon on intimate terms with Kerensky and introduced Maugham to him, being his main liaison and translator. Maugham told Gerald Kelly that he had seen a lot of Sasha this time. She was charming and helpful, energetic as well as impudent. She knew and had access to very important officials, and by extraordinary twist of fate was now a powerful figure in Russia. But her fortunes changed once again when the Bolsheviks seized power and confiscated Peter Kropotkin's 250,000-acre estate in Tambov province. In 1919, Sasha was detained by the Cheka, and the following year caught typhoid fever. She was lucky to overcome it. Her husband Lebedev, overworked and starving, suffered a nervous breakdown which brought them to a divorce. After her father's death and the state funeral in 1921, Sasha finally was allowed to emigrate. In 1921, she left tumultuous Russia, the land of famine, uprisals, treachery, and murders, and arrived in the USA. She retained her royal honorific that her father Peter Kropotkin had disowned and was called Princess. So that's how the New York Times of April 6, 1927 informed the readers about her arrival and her willingness to deliver lectures based on her observations and predictions of the downfall of the Soviet power. Princess Alexandra Kropotkin was welcomed in the land of jazz, Hollywood, and bootlegging. All journeys have a secret destination of which the traveler is unaware. What was in store for her? What did she bring with her to the new country? She brought along the painful memories of her father dying of starvation, the tears of her mother writing farewell, waving farewell with her handkerchief. She brought along the disappointment of the unfulfilled romance, the despair of the broken marriage, the stinging sensations of bitter humiliation during her arrest and imprisonment, and the vacuum of the lost motherland. Yet, she brought along her brilliant skills of debate and argumentation, weathered in the home disputes with her father's friends on politics, social issues, and human virtues and vices. She brought along her good taste in literature, music, and art, refined in discussions on Shakespeare, Byron, and Shelley with Bernard Shaw and William Morris, who were Marxists and socialists, and supported her in her development. She brought her abridged translations of George Bernard Shaw plays into Russian, and Leo Tolstoy's War and Peace abridged edition in translation, and further Dostoevsky's translation, Crime and Punishment in her translation, in the abridged form. She brought with these works with her. Little did she know that in a few years, her career as a journalist would take off. She started a rubric in the weekly magazine Liberty under the title To the Ladies. To the Ladies. And that's how she was called, a translator, a linguist, a traveler, and a fashion authority. She was addressed Princess Alexandra Kropotkin. These are her articles. And what did she write about in these articles? A limited but intensive study of her publications made it clear that as a journalist, she kept American readers interested and engaged for a quarter of a century, appealing to their hearts and minds by telling them stories through which she channeled her inner self. Her comments were full of wry humor. What is the difference between the musicians and the rest of the masculine mankind? She asked in the article about Mr. Ferdegrosse. Like all other professional musicians, he never sings in the bath. In her regular column titled To the Ladies, she wrote about celebrities such as Charles Chaplin and rank-and-file people. She glorified people and gave advice to them. In numerous articles, she would describe how much she learned from her mother. In October 27th issue of the magazine, she wrote, "Among the many debts I owe my own very wise mother is the lesson of not worshipping inanimate objects. When a maid smashes her best china after an admonition, she says, 'Well, that is the way china dies, since death comes to everyone at some time or the other.' People are more important to her, not inanimate objects." Once Alexandra introduced Tea-Ata of Chickasaw Nation, an Indian tribe, an only performer of the Indian folklore who entertained at the White House. Then, from her interview with Tea-Ata, Alexandra extracted 3 short Indian anecdotes that fit the writer's pithy style. Here is one of them. To keep peace among themselves, Indian women every year would dig a deep hole in which they ceremoniously buried all their unkind thoughts. That's what Alexandra did in her life. She buried all sad and unkind thoughts and wrote only positive stories. It was a classical projection of her own persona, multifaceted and intriguing. In her articles, she would emphasize the uniqueness of the Russian national identity manifested in simple-mindedness and innocence, obedience, and far-reaching hospitality. How did her ego and superego project a Russian psyche? In one of her articles in Liberty Weekly, she wrote, "Years ago, an English friend asked me if all Russians were as unnecessarily truthful as I was. I certainly did my best to live up to that reputation." Whatever was stored in her subconscious mind gave way. She retained her dedication to the Russian people through years of living in the US, providing memorable stories from her past almost in every issue of the weekly. Stories about her arrest, about the arrest of her friends, and how she helped them to get out of jail. Carl Jung once remarked that nothing was ever lost in the psyche. Nothing was lost in her psyche either. In one of the articles, she portrayed an American who went to the Soviet Union to teach the Russian women how to be welders during the Second World War. And in this, she expressed her better relations to the Russian country, to the Soviet Union. She wrote about a wide variety of things. She was an authority on fashion, and not only that, she was interviewed. She was a brilliant debater, And when she was interviewed by the Longin TV program, she answered the questions that were very, very anti-Russian. The question, Secretary A, testifying before the Congressional Committee on June 26, said that America's quarrel today is not with world communism or with the dictators of the Kremlin, but with old-fashioned Russian nationalism. It is clear that the process of encroachment and consolidation by which Russia has grown over the last 500 years from the Duchy of Muscovy to a vast empire must be stopped. Do you agree with this statement? And the answer was no. I never agree with Mr. Etchison anyway. That's a Machiavellian statement, and I think a rather bad one. After all, if there weren't communism at the present moment, there wouldn't be Russian nationalism and imperialism. Another question. A large majority of Russian people are opposed to the regime. But Russians fought well against Germans. The supposition is that the Russian soldiers have a very good morale. Answer. Russians have always fought well. They have never been cowards. That's the trait of the Russian people. There are a great many of the young people who were born under communism. They don't like the regime. They would like something different. But when it comes to fighting the enemy, they'll fight for any kind of government. This interview confirmed once again that her patriotic sentiments were always vibrant, and she was never shy to express them. And finally, Sasha Kropotkin appealed to the gustatory taste of her readers, and she published a cookbook replete with her stories from the revolutionary Russia. This is like proposing a toast. This is her creative legacy to the generations to come. This is a gesture of the Russian hospitality that she referred to in her articles. Through her cookbook, she invited the whole world to her table served with the Russian delicacies. Her cookbook recreated the image of skatert samobranka. To close, I'd like to quote Alexandra's cookbook. Bring your small buckwheat pancakes to the table, piled on a hot platter. Put a bowl of melted butter on the table and a bowl of sour cream. Also, on the table have a dish of smoked salmon, cut in thin slices, a dish of cut-up salt herring, and last but not least, caviar and vodka. And thank you.